Yeah, so that's sick. What this was for Spider-Man. What was
Yeah.
the task? Like, tell me from start to finish. Like, how'd it go? How'd it go
Yeah,
down?
so this guy's a boss character, and obviously it's up on my site, but all these are, as you know, at big studios and everything, a team of people all working on it. So, but at least the way it worked in a lot of the scenarios I've been in is, you kind of try to have a artist as the owner of that, and then like let's say character, and then you have rigging, but we kind of try to keep the same artists on it the whole time if we can, just to keep the ownership level and communication and everything else. So yeah, this he was one of the bosses in the game, and one of the big baddies, and yeah, I came in as production was starting, or like we were already in production on the game when I joined. So yeah, this was one of my second task or third task of the game, something like that, pretty early on. And yeah, a labor of love here. So that like the scale of him being that big, it was like you mentioned, what do you have to do to get something, to be cognizant of what you have to do to get something to be in real time, right? Because if it was VFX or film or whatever, it'd be like, all right, sweet, we're gonna throw like a ton of polys at this guy. He's huge, so we want to go crazy on all the detailing. And one of the things that I found out, pretty quick from the get go was like I was going to sculpt in just like all this detail and try to sculpt in every single scale or skin detail, and then realizing that like because of like map cap sizes, and just the number of material calls and all this kind of stuff, like we weren't going to be able to bake it all down, like you would do more in a VFX type scenario where you just throw a bunch of data at it. So I had the idea, like we do tiling detail maps for a lot of characters. So if it's like Spider-Man, you'll have a tiling texture. The texture is actually pretty small and kind of like a splat map or whatever in environment art. You tile it around and mix your tilables. So same kind of thing for a lot of character assets. And so on this guy, I was like, oh, well, maybe I could do an organic version of that. So, using different detail tilables for like one of scales and one of like skin detail and another one of like little bumps and things like that. You can kind of see if you zoom in. So then I had like a good layer of sculpt detail on everything on like the ZBrush like bakes and stuff like that. But then to tile this data on top so that we got like even more fidelity out of the textures. So you could get up even closer and you start to see the tiling detail. And so it doesn't look low res. And that really helped like get that fidelity we were looking for. So you can see like on his hand on the screen left, those are sculpted in like a lot of the secondary forms, and then for the tertiary forms, like it's relying on that tiling detail of like skin, skin detail and stuff like that. And
So
then
like
on his
bump,
yeah,
just adding tiled bump in the shader is what you mean?
yeah, yeah. So like adding extra layers of normal map detail on top of the base normal map
Yeah.
detail, but also not just the normal map detail, but also like color overlay. So you can add like when you see a small little nub on his skin or something like that, we can add like we can add a little bit of diffuse information and spec information and normal map information. So it does more than just like tiling a normal map, because that doesn't really always read as realistic as it would otherwise. So
Okay.
yeah, that really helped. And then this guy, like the anatomy of the mouth was super fun. And when I say fun, I mean in the moment that you get the task, it's way overwhelming, and like you feel like it's just crazy pants.
Yeah.
So yeah, trying to figure all that out, and like I was able to look at different try to find scans or try to find reference of different, just Google the hell out of all kinds of crocodiles and animals, and even the anatomy of like where his musculature is in his mouth, like because crocodiles and animals like that don't have a big masseter. It's actually on the inside where the big muscle is. And so yeah, just a lot of cool sciencey type stuff, like pulling from real life, and then putting it into like a character like that. And then obviously the spikes, trying to get them, because it would be a lot easier to make things symmetrical and just hit the clone to other side button. But when you do that, it starts to look, like you're cutting corners. So trying to find a balance of what is mirrored and then what's asymmetrical, and then keeping it all within budget was just quite a challenge.
Yeah. Are you when you're dealing with the budget, are you putting it in game and then finding out later, oh shit, too high, or are you able to do it
Like
kind of
we
same time?
I think a lot of studios, you have targets for different classes. So like enemies, you have a certain range, and heroes, you have a certain range, and then bosses have a certain range as well. So you already know from the get go, like I can't be double over what a boss needs to be. And let's say you push that out, and like you'll get complaints like, hey, you just you just made everything go out of frame.
Yeah.
So yeah, you try to always stay within that, even when you're doing like, because we don't just jump to the high res. Like you're doing a proxy version, and then you're kind of going one step further and then another step further, and each time that's going all the way through the game, right? So that everybody can get feedback and make sure it's looking how it should. And then yeah, when you get to this stage where you're trying to do the for real pass, yeah, trying to figure out tricks to keep it within budget. So a lot of these spikes, they're actually the exact same spike with the exact same UVs. And so you're taking a poly hit of like your poly density is going higher, but you're saving UV space because you're not giving unique UVs to every single spike, like tricks like that to try to allow you to get all this on screen, but at a cheaper cost.
Are you able to use UDIMs?
Yeah, we do use UDIMs. It depends on your renderer, like whether they support it, or I think Unreal, which we don't use, but Unreal has, yeah, it just depends on the renderer. But you could be using an engine that doesn't. But at the end of the day, there's lots of different ways to get the textures on.
Yeah. So when you're giving,
but coming from like VFX and film and everything, it was like, yeah, UDIMs are a nice ease of work.
Yeah, it's like, okay, if you just need more detail there, new UDIM. Yeah. So when you get this first task, like, is it get handed over to you by a concept artist and you have to follow it one to one, or do you have freedom, or are you designing it yourself? How's it?
No, yeah. So it's usually, especially for bigger assets like this, there's already a concept pass that has it, depending on the situation. Like different studios, the character artist might be working with a concept artist, or maybe the concept fully comes in done, and then it's like, hey, now make this work. There's a lot of different dynamics that people run into. So with this, there was concept art. We had like a prototype of this thing, so kind of like already proportioned out a little bit. And so like the base was kind of had a starting point, and then you're working with various people to try to honor the concept as much as you can. But there are different reviews that you go through to make sure that the various levels all feel like it's on track. And then sometimes there are points where the concept may have had some strokes that really looked great in concept, but when you see them in 3D, it's just like, that's not going to work. Or for whatever other reason, like a lot of times it's, if the spikes, let's say there were spikes here, and then when he does a range of motion and he stabs himself, we're like, okay, now we got to, revise that, or things like that in concept, you just can't answer all those questions all the time. So,
work in progress.
Yeah, and that's why we try not to just jump to the final all of a sudden, because you could spend a ton of art days doing that and then realize some of these things we realized, right? So try to fail quickly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Is there anything on like the anatomy that you think about when you were doing this, like tricep
sure,
versus bicep?
Yeah, for sure. Like his arms are pretty humanoid, and his whole like torso for the most part. And he's got all the ones in his back, like all the spikes and spines and things like that. So when it came to back anatomy, I was a little less concerned there, just because there's so much going on back there. But yeah, and then when you look at his tail that comes out, right, it's a massive tail, and so then it's like, all right, now I'm looking at T-Rex reference and things like that to try to see how does that work. But then you realize the anatomy is like not exactly how the concept is, because we're still a little more humanoid in some of those ways. So um, yeah, it's fun with a sci-fi character like that, because you get to look at a bunch of different animals, let's say, and like or humans, and try to figure out like what that skeletal structure is, and bounce it off of the rigging team, and figure out, because like this also had muscles in there as well, that were simulated. So like trying to figure out how all that works. But yeah, I'm definitely thinking about anatomy in those ways, and especially with the mouth, and like how we even like made a skull in there too, to just show the range of motion on like how far could we go before you wouldn't physically be able to do that. So that's one of the things I like about game, like that high level type of character art, like high profile stuff, is that you get the time to really dive in and try to figure all these things out.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
It's really high res looking. Like how do you think it would look if you threw it into Arnold? What do you think it'd look as
I
good as film?
Well, so there's different, because there isn't displacement, right? Like some of this is cheated, like the subsurface doesn't respond the same. And so if you threw the high res, if I took the high res and I brought it into like a film type of workflow, I think, yeah, you could get it looking great. If you brought this just with the normal maps and everything else into Arnold, I think it would probably look better, but it wouldn't be at like a film level quality, just because yeah, there are kind of like cheats going on, or things like that, that if you were to do a normal film type workflow, you would be
Hmm.
able to just get a lot more out of that. But
Hmm.
no, for a game, I think it's pretty good.
So you mentioned that the black and white actually becomes helpful. How
Mm-hmm.
was it helpful with the characters? Who do you say?
Um, yeah, I mean so there's obviously like different value. So it's kind of a values test, whereas like you might have a hues test or something else that shows like, whoa, these colors are too saturated,
Hmm.
or whatever else. And then this is just a good balance, like even zooming way out in the image, go black and white, and like where does your eye go to first, and like we'll do that to try to just see, aside from colors, where is your eye going to, and like are you calling out an area that people don't actually need to pay attention to. Or a lot of times we'll also look into like gradients of like kind of the school of thought of like trying to go from bottom and attract your eyes to the focal point, which is the head. So sometimes people will do that literally by like applying gradients on more stylized stuff,
Huh.
to actually go from dark to light and keep light whether that's the center of the body. And even in animals like dolphins and whatever, there's a bunch of different natural places where color is used to like draw your eye. So yeah, the value thing is, it's just another one of those tools, just like flipping your image horizontally or vertically, or I yeah, there's a lot of tricks there.
Well, definitely your eye goes to the creature for sure in this one. um,
Yeah, and I mean, depending on your lighting, you could have like a rim light that just calls too much attention. But I guess I'm referring to it more in like the values of the character.
yeah.
Yeah.
So with the scales,
Mhm.
I'm noticing that where there's no bending at the
Mhm.
joints, you have these bigger scale folds,
Mhm.
versus it gets smaller, and then on here it's not. You don't have some of this like
Mhm.
shin protection on the thighs. What was
Mhm.
the reasoning?
Some of that is from concept, so that it'll look like that in the concept, and then, but let's say that there was a huge, bone coming out of his kneecap or something like that. Sometimes we'll talk as a group, and if it's like, hey, that bone coming out of the kneecap is going to be a huge deformation issue, it's just going to cause a lot of hassle and whatever else. And is that thing coming out of the kneecap critical to the character or not? We might move it or remove it or alter it, but yeah, and here this was kind of honored by the concept, which had these scales, and so I kind of took them as like shin guards or something like that, where you want to have more protection there in
Mhm.
general. And I made these like slightly subdermal, meaning that it looks like maybe they're just kind of underneath the skin a little bit, as opposed to like a spike that's literally shooting out, right? So yeah, it just kind of leaning into it and then trying to gradate off the values. Like you can see in intensity as it goes up towards the knee, like it just lessens in the intensity of the sculpt, just to kind of help your eye believe that it could fade in and fade out like that organically.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
that one's kind of more concept driven.
Cool. Um, And it's cool that you have, the bumps on the outside of the shoulders, and then it becomes more fleshy
Hmm.
around in these areas. Were you seeing that a lot in your reference
A little
images?
bit in the concept, but again, it's like having ref boards with like not hundreds, but a lot of different animals, and like noticing that, like, why would they have bigger scales on their back, like an alligator, versus on the underside, and like a lot of animals, like the bellies where they don't want to be attacked because they kind of have that vulnerability there, but on the outside they're like tougher. So I kind of leaned into that, as well as the concept will gesture at different things, and maybe there are bigger hits on like the outside than the inside. But
Mhm.
as an artist, the cool part is like being able to have fun with that, and like find, because they won't call out every single detail, right? So you get to use your imagination on how you kind of want to tell that story, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
The texturing is nice too, like that the painting part. What were you using to paint in?
This is all Substance Painter,
Okay.
which was a bit of an adjustment, because in VFX a lot of it's Mari, just because you, like you said, you can go Udemy crazy and like and all that. But Mari is definitely its own headache that I'm happy to not have to deal with. So um, yeah, Painter, like, games use a lot of Painter,
So
but I think environment and other things do as well.
mhm.
So.
Yeah, it's nice that it's darker on the outside, and again, like,
Hmm.
lighter and brighter on the inside, same in the chest, which also gives it, areas of rest as well. So it's not just all high
Hmm.
res, high frequency stuff, which is what's nice. You're talking about the gradients with the color to help control the eye, but as
Right.
well as, like, you have detail here, but then it calms down here, but then you have this big contrast of detail, everything right here.
Hmm.
So everything can kind of,
Yeah,
flows
there's this
nicely.
there's the the artistic rule that, and again, it's not like I learned these things in school or something. It's like the more years you're in the industry, but like the 70-30 rule, and like trying to keep areas of, like you said, areas of rest followed by areas of detail, but not a 50-50, but actually like 70% rest and 30% detail, meaning that, yeah, there's just a balance of trying to not just have detail everywhere, because a lot of times people that are starting out, they're like, oh, I'm going to make it high res, I'm going to make it HD or something like that, right? And you end up like stamping shit all over your character because you're like, look, it's high res. But it's like, it's about how you're putting that information down, as opposed to just that you're putting the information down. If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
that's super cool. All right, let's go to the next one. Oh, these are other views of it, which is
Yeah,
cool.
I think that's just a different view. This was kind of fun, because like for our breakdowns, we get to just work with an animator or find a pose or whatever else, because the game's made, so you have a lot of content to pull from. So here, I grabbed like one of the animators' awesome poses, and then was able to finesse it a little bit. And then here, again, I think I found, either I made this pose or I found I don't think I made this pose. I found a pose, and then I like built this little environment for it, and then did the lighting, just because like just to show it off, and also to have fun with it, because when you're done with a project like that, it's just nice to get a little creative freedom. So
Yeah, it's sick. I love this part right here. It's like a mixture of a dinosaur a bit, right? From this view, it kind of looks
yeah,
like a
yeah,
dinosaur.
yeah, that was like inspiration from like T-Rexes and stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously the concept as well, but yeah, it felt fun, and having that little dewlap thing underneath his chin, you can see on that bottom image on the left.
Oh yeah.
That kind of makes a C curve. Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
There's cool ability like to have that, and that's on a lot of lizards and stuff too, like having that gullet thing. So
And they had that rigged as well.
yeah, I don't think it did a ton, but like on other characters I've done in the past, like that thing's like, you could expand and contract it or something like that, or use it for breathing and all that. I don't remember how much we did with it, but yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool when you're showing off the poses. It really brings it into life.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. Seeing things in bind pose, like a lot of the time we're working in bind pose, but it doesn't get people jazzed like a pose does. So
yeah, that's cool. If you like that clip, be sure to subscribe so you can catch the full interview coming up.